boundlessness. Our consciousness is boundless, so we say. It is in the composite nature of human consciousness where you have to find the solution for the mystery of man, the mystery of our consciousness, our hearts and our minds. Anyone who observes himself with more than superficial interest knows that his consciousness is composed. Nobody is always the same. During just one day, you are several different I's, different egos. You are sometimes an intellectual, for instance, when you try to analyze a difficult text. That means that you focus on the intellectual part of your consciousness. You say I to that intellectual part. Do you remember we talked about the man who identified a piece of rope as a snake? For him, it was a snake at that moment. Likewise, you can identify yourself with the intellect in you. You are the intellect. That's your reality. But perhaps a few minutes later, you are your emotions, because a colleague says something nasty to you. Then you say I to the emotional part in you. Then the emotional world is your reality. And then you see a beautiful trip to Indonesia in a newspaper. You would like to go there on holiday. You identify yourself with desire, the longing part in you. But sometimes you are compassionate. You are concerned about the refugees, about the war victims. You feel related to them. You are another I, an I of nobler quality. Then you land that higher ego reality. So during just one day, you are different egos. Well, in various religious systems around the world and in all ages, human consciousness is divided in several aspects. Some systems divide the man in 2 aspects, or 3, or 4, or 7. In our world, the classification of St. Paul, as it appears in the Bible, is the most common. Man is spirit, soul, and body. Few people know the difference between spirit and soul, but in our view there is a clear difference between those two. The spirit is the immortal core, also called the monad, the lasting part within us. It is an essentially boundless reservoir of consciousness, at home in the entire cosmos. It is our inner God, very grand, very lofty. It has a very vast reach of consciousness. The spirit is our link with the boundless. Then we have the lower link, and the words up and down and lower and higher are always used in a relative way. The body, the vehicle, the instrument of which the spirit makes use of. The body is, to use Plato's terminology, the shadow on the wall of the cave, the outer side of consciousness. Now, the spirit cannot act directly on the vehicle. That would be the same as if you would connect an electric current with a voltage of thousands of volts with a light bulb which is made for 220 volts. That light bulb would burn out immediately. You have to put transformers in that electric current which transform the current to a usable power. In the stream of consciousness, which flows from the boundlessness through the spirit to the outer world, the transformer is formed by the soul. Actually, the soul is a series of transformers. More about that later. So we have, as humans, an immortal core, imperishable. We have a part that learns, the soul. The soul is the developed consciousness, the forces and potentials which are already brought into activity, and that we bring more and more and more into activity, because the soul learns every day. And finally, we have the body, the carrier, the vehicle of the whole. Now there is another way to divide consciousness. You can divide human consciousness in 7 aspects, a format that is often used in Theosophy. 7 principles of consciousness: Atman, the divine; Buddhi, spiritual principle; Manas, the mind, the thinking principle; Kama, desire; Prana, vital principle; Linga Sharira, the astral; and the Sthula Sharira, physical part. You can also make a combination of these 2 diagrams, and then we get this. You see the same 7 principles of consciousness: Atman, Buddhi, Manas, but now grouped in a diagram of spirit, soul, and body. And we can already say something about the heart and mind of man. Look, the heart is the spirit, our inner core, the essence of our being. The intermediate part is the soul, our mind, and the lower aspects make up our senses, our emotional life. The interesting thing about this diagram is that Manas is divided in 2 aspects. So the thinking principle is divided in 2 aspects: a higher Manas and a lower Manas. The mind can be directed at the spirit and directed at the fabric, the material world. In other words, a part of our soul tends upwards, or better expressed, inwards, to the source from which it comes, and another part tends toward the body, into the matter. Now we can divide our soul even more detailed. You must know that the small always repeats or imitates the great. So if there are 7 principles of consciousness, there are also 7 principles of Manas, the 7 aspects of our thinking. Everything is always made up of other elements and is a part of something bigger. Manas is a part of the overall consciousness of man, but is also made up of various aspects, the thinking aspect or the thought aspects. We can show that on this diagram. There is an atmic aspect of Manas, a Buddhic aspect of Manas, and so on. Now, you might say, this helped me to understand myself better. But if you translate these 7 aspects of Manas into English words and concepts, then you will, at least I hope so, recognize these aspects in yourself. We get this. You see, we only use English words. In our core thinking differently, you won't find any Sanskrit word. We try to show you by means of English words and concepts certain truths within yourself. These are the 7 aspects of human thinking which are explained extensively in the lessons 3 and 4 of Thinking Differently. And we ask our students if they can give examples of each of these aspects. To explain it a little bit for you, I give of these aspects 1 or more examples. Beginning with the physical. When you say I to your body, you are thinking physically. The physical thought aspect is active. You look in the mirror and say, oh, I'm beauty or I'm ugly. Then you identify yourself with your body. You lie hours in the sun for a tan. You focus on your body, you think you are your body. The second aspect, the sensory aspect, or feeling, or emotion. This aspect has everything to do with the senses. You feel, see, taste, smell something, and that evokes a thought. Many people often identify themselves with this aspect. Vitality. Doing for the sake of doing. You want to do it yourself. You cannot sit still. You can describe it as a thirst for action that lacks all reasonable deliberation. In our Western world, this aspect often dominates our consciousness. There are, for instance, people who clean and paint their house, although their house is already cleaned and well painted. Desire, the fourth thought aspect. The force of desire is a neutral force. It's not good nor bad per se. It derives its color from the motive with which it is used and the purpose for which it is directed. There are selfish desires, but also unselfish desires. The desires for wisdom, for instance, philosophy, is very noble. Intellect. The intellectual aspect is what we call the 2 × 2 = 4 thinking, analyzing, categorizing, classifying. It's an aspect that is mainly trained in our schools. But it is different than understanding, than insight. For example, you can learn math formulas by heart and thus make sums and solve equations and you get right answers, but you don't know what's happening. The faculty of understanding or insight means that you see the relationship between seemingly unrelated things. You can see the relationship between phenomena. You perceive the interconnectedness of all things, of all beings. A solution for a problem on the basis of understanding or insight is therefore very different than an intellectual solution. An intellectual solution for the hunger in the world may be, for example, a development of better agricultural machinery. By the way, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you solve the problem with understanding, with insight, then you know that the hunger in the world has everything to do with the abundance elsewhere. Understanding, therefore, has everything to do with compassion. And finally, Atman. We're called the Atmas aspect of Manas inspiration, sense of oneness, probably would be a better word. Our students have great difficulty in finding examples of this aspect, and that is because we hardly have developed it. But maybe it happened to you once or twice that you were on a quiet beach at night in the mountains watching the beautiful stars, and then you sensed the oneness of everything. You felt you are an inseparable part of a larger whole. You lost your lower self and found a much larger self. Now you will have noticed that the quality of those aspects differ greatly. The reach of consciousness of each aspect is different than that of the others. The more spiritual, the greater the reach of consciousness. So the physical thought aspect, but in fact the 4 aspects of the lower manas are limited. That means they are personal, while the higher 3 aspects are impersonal, or as we used to say, super-personal. I don't know if it's a good English word, but it means that it is not personal, it's above personal, super-personal. There is a huge difference between a personal and a super-personal thought aspect. The personal man thinks anthropomorphically, while the super-personal man is much more universal. And therefore we use the following definition. A personal man lives in the illusion of separateness. And a super-personal human being lives in the awareness of unity. The personal man thinks he is independent of others. He thinks that he has nothing to do with others, which all too often results in selfishness. The superpersonal man tends much more to selflessness. He does not live for himself, but he knows that he is a part of a larger whole. When we take another look at the 7 thought aspects, then we can see which aspects are by nature superpersonal and which tend more to the fabric. You may ask yourself if the intellect is also superpersonal. Indeed, it often causes a lot of trouble, but it is because it is often used, or rather abused, by kama, desire. One uses often his intellect to satisfy his desires. Technology is an example of kama manas, desire and intellect. But someone who is purely intellectual doesn't think of himself, he forgets that he is hungry, that his shoes are not polished. It's the image of the absent-minded professor. Insight, understanding, the buddhi aspect, and the sense of oneness, Atman, are purely superpersonal. The relationship between living beings, yes, even the oneness of all beings, is fully experienced by someone who identifies himself with these thought aspects. The superpersonal human lives in his heart. He knows he's not separate from the rest of life and that all life comes from the same source, the same inner core. After the break, we will give you some hints how to awaken the consciousness of the heart within yourself. Well, I've told you a lot, give you a summary. What did I tell you? I told you about consciousness, a being, conscious being, an intelligent force, life. It acts and reacts, it's the object of action, and responds or reacts itself. Self-consciousness, consciousness that can reflect on itself. Thinking involves self-consciousness. We talked about this spiritualistic point of view. There is an operative force in or behind the phenomenal world. Objective idealism. Something is real as long as the observing consciousness lends it a reality. Anthropomorphic thinking, judging from one's own point of view what one's senses perceive. The external world is an illusion, a shadow, a maya, and human consciousness has different aspects. Well, your questions, please. Well, you may think about it. It's a lot of, and then afterwards you ask me your questions better. I think it's better to have some tea now, coffee and drink, and then after 15, 20 minutes, we will go on.
Well, there's one question.
One question, yes.
Yes. And you mentioned that the lower thinking aspects, that you mentioned something like vitality, that how do you say, such belongs to the personal man, or personal woman. And the higher thinking aspects belongs to the impersonal or superpersonal man. But I can think of people where vitality is very dominant, but still can be, or at least regarded by the world as very impersonal. Something like Mother Teresa. But I can also think of people where perhaps the more Buddhic thinking aspect, where you clearly see there is an understanding of how things work, but they are not very impersonal. They use it for personal reasons.
Well, that's a good question. You don't have to think that one of these aspects is bad or is good per se, you know. We need them all. We need our body, we need our emotions, vitality, our desire. And without desire, we don't do anything. We have to create a desire to learn more about ourselves, about the world, etc. But the thing is that they are a hierarchy, and each of these aspects has to know its place, yeah? So the emotion or the vitality or desire don't have to take the lead in our consciousness. Yeah? The lead is for the Buddhic and the Atmic aspect in us. They are the real leaders in us. They are the king in us. But that doesn't mean that we have to eliminate those lower aspects. No, on the contrary, without those lower aspects, we cannot do anything. You know, it's very interesting, it's just a lack of time, but personality is derived from a Greek word, persona, and that means mask. So the mask is the illusory man, behind the mask is the real man, and the real man is the higher aspects of thinking. We have this folder for thinking differently. We had another one, and there was a man. Oh yeah, there, yeah, of course. That's some people wonder why do you use that statue? It's a statue in Madrid, in Spain. Well, it shows that there is a mask, the personality, the man, the role we play in this outer world. But the real man, the real human being we are, yeah, he is not his masks. He is Buddhi Atman. So if you attend the course and you not just attend, but you practice what is taught in the course, thinking differently, then you are able to take the mask from you and identify yourself with the real human being that you are. That doesn't mean that you have to throw away the mask. No, you have to use it, but not be it. That's the clue of the mystery of consciousness, I think. I don't know if I answer your question, Jos, but...
Perhaps not completely, because again, using the example of Mother Teresa, where you could say that the vitality aspect, so the lower thinking aspect, is dominant in her personality. People would argue that she's an impersonal.
I understand. For instance, I take myself as an example. If I was a human being who identified just with the vitality, with the prana in me, and somebody was doing some technical things here with the computer, and I said, no, I will do it myself, yeah? Well, for sure. My wife is in here, so she knows it. That would have given problems, because I have two left hands, yeah? So, in that case, it's better for me, it's wiser not to be too vital, but there are people who know a lot of things, are very wise, but they want to share it with others because they are lazy. Well, that's the opposite thing. Now, they should be there would have been some, if there would have been some more vitality, that would have been better for the world. So the thing is, you have to be the master of your consciousness. You have to be the master of the 7 aspects. Know which aspect you have to use at a certain moment. And if you have the higher aspects, if you have made the higher aspects the dominating force in your consciousness, then it's more easier for you to control the lower aspects. Yeah? And then you are you have a kind of fatality when it's necessary, but you may also be quiet or don't do anything when the situation doesn't want you to do anything.
But isn't it true that if you look at the superior thinking aspects, and as you mentioned it here in this diagram, you say, well, they're always impersonal, and the lower thinking aspects, they're always personal, selfish, you could say. Where I think at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned that it's actually a tendency. So the lower thinking aspects, their tendency it's drawing you down, and the higher ones are drawing you up. But it could well be that if the understanding, the Buddhic aspect is more dominant, it still can be that you use it selfishly.
Yeah, but I said in the talk, well, the lower aspects tend, there's a tendency. If you leave them alone, they tend to selfishness. That's why you have to control them, and you have to pull them up, as it were. And the higher aspects, they tend to unselfishness. So they are more compassionate, etc. But of course, everything in nature has two sides. So even the higher aspects may have some negative point negative point, but that's not very inspiring to talk about. But really, you may try to develop the Buddhic aspect, for instance, to be liberated of all the worries of the outer world. That's not what Theosophy teaches, because Theosophy always said that compassion is the most important thing, but you may use your Buddhic quality to get some rest, some mental rest, some spiritual rest. But as far as we see it, and the real Buddhic thing is that we do it not for ourselves, but for the sake of others, for the sake of compassion.
Well, as I see it, it's always the motive, the why you do things. It's important.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Compassion, yeah.
But for the Course thinking differently, the most important is, first, you have to recognize the 7 aspects in yourself. Yeah? Can I give examples of feeling, emotion, physical thinking, vitality, desire, intellect, insight, aspiration? If you can that, at a certain moment in the Course, in the 6th lesson, you have to make an analysis of somebody, and you have to make an analysis of yourself as well, but we don't ask you about that, but it's not our business to know you, but we want you to know yourself. If you make an analysis of yourself on the basis of the 7 aspects and the basis of anthropomorphic thinking and all the things in the first 6th lesson of thinking differently, well, the next step, and that I want to tell you after the break, is how can I develop the more spiritual parts of my consciousness? How can I develop the Buddhic and the Atmic part of my consciousness? So the Course has 2 sides. The first 6th lesson is, what is our consciousness? What kind of aspects do we have in our consciousness? How do we think? What kind of thoughts do we think? And then, lesson 7, 8, 9 till 12, how can I reform my character? How can I develop the spiritual, compassionate, divine aspects in my consciousness? And that part we are going to tell after the break. Yeah, we have a tea now. A real English tea.